I'm here not only, as somebody interested in food, but also as a fan of each of the people here on the stage with me. And I think I'd like to start by asking a question to Brian. I've heard an interview with you before about your piece in Time, and it sounded like, compared to Dr. Nessel and Peter Pringle, who've been working on this for some time, this was something you started looking into, you formed some conclusions, you wrote about it, which is probably kind of similar to how somebody might feel after just seeing this movie for the first time without a background in it. So what did you think when you started to look into this? Were you shocked, and what was your big takeaway?
I mean, I was shocked, and I come at this from the environmental angle, because that's what I spend most of my time doing, and so it was started to look into what the impact of factory farming and all its facets was having first on the land, looking at it from the impact it was going to have on climate change and global warming. But then, yeah, it also extended into health, because I've done stories in the past on childhood obesity, and you mentioned that as well, that impact that we're seeing in the hospitals, and just you began to connect the dots, and the film does a very great way of doing that. The fact that on one hand we have this food system that's been incredibly successful in producing so many calories that at least at the cash register, a low price, but then you start to look at all of the other side effects that go into it, whether it is the rise in obesity, the rise in diabetes, whether it is the dead zones that you see off the coast, whether it is, of course, animal welfare and that issue as well. And so that really got me. And it is something that there's the veil is what they put about it. I mean, that has to be lifted. And once it is lifted, it is fairly shocking and worrying that this transformation of the past several decades has been allowed to go on without anyone really being fully aware of it. As the number of farmers actually in America, of course, shrank as they become more productive, you started to see this greater and greater disconnect. And I'm hoping that books like that they've written here or stories that are getting into the mainstream media, and you saw, I think, this summer there was the story I did was just one example. I mean, you really felt the New York Times doing a series on meat and on the problem of food safety there. There's a real sense that you may be getting towards a tipping point there, and hopefully that'll get into the general public as well.
Yeah, one thing that worries me is I would absolutely not characterize myself as anti-farmer. I also didn't feel like this film was anti-farmer, and yet it has been called that, and there are a number of AstroTurf websites up claiming that this film is awful and it's saying awful things about farmers. I want farmers to do well. I want them to succeed, and yet the way that agribusiness establishment reacted to this film and to your piece. Can you talk a little bit about that for us?
Yeah, that was, a bit surprising to me. Because having written about climate change, that can be kind of a controversial topic, but it wasn't anywhere near like the sort of reaction that this got. And, it surprised me because, I didn't feel that I was anti-farmer. I didn't want that piece to be seen in any way as anti-farmer or anti-food. Rather, it was quite the opposite. The idea is to focus more attention and maybe more money on our food system and on the people who produce it, instead of treating them as just cogs in a machine that's designed to get the calories out the door at the lowest possible price point. But I am worried in that way, and I think the aftermath of that story really demonstrated to me viscerally that there's a gap here. There's a really wide culture gap, and I worry that you have people on one side here that see Food Inc. and are really moved by it and so forth, and you have the other that sees it as an attack on their values. And what I don't know yet is how to really cross that. How to figure out a way to have this discussion and create positive change without the feeling that you're just speaking over a really wide gulf and there's no way to cross it.
Yeah, and I heard you say something that I thought was really right on, which was more or less that global warming itself and the shortage of oil that's upcoming is a far bigger threat to farmers and their ability to keep doing business as they are than your article or a movie like this.
Right, absolutely. Just as we saw with GM, with a business model that was based around oil at $20 a barrel worked just fine. It's not going to work in the future. It's not going to work with the system as well. If it's based on petroleum fertilizer, it's based on shipping food all over the place. And that's something that has to be prepared for on a national level, and I worry that's not really being the case. And in the meantime, of course, the arguments come over, who's saying what or what story's going out there. We're not dealing with what is going to be a real issue. saw the number of hungry people in the United States going up, just stats coming out last week. We saw it worldwide as well. I mean, this problem has to be dealt with, and you know, it's not going to be dealt with in this sort of polarized way that we seem to have it now.
Yeah, I think that really sets us up very well to talk to Peter. There was a quote in the movie, I can't remember which of the narrators said it, but they said, anytime you see a problem in the system, rather than fixing it, they find some high-tech fix to keep the bad system in place and just make it a little bit more convoluted. Peter's book, I do disagree a little bit with your conclusion, but I cannot recommend it highly enough. I think it's fabulous in that, just as Brian was just saying, the discourse is really bad very often. You end up with a lot of mudslinging and not a lot of facts and discussion and debate. The topic of your book, of course, is biotech, and hopefully you'll walk us through a little bit about how some of that has happened, where some preliminary scientific research will come out, and rather than debating it and further analyzing it, you have a lot of name-calling and obscuring of the actual issue. But do you think biotech is just coming up with another crazy techno fix for a bad system, or do you think it holds promise?
Well, as I said at the beginning of my book, I tried to go down the middle of this, and if you go down the middle of anything, you get shot at by both sides. So I'm assuming that somebody's going to come out of this side anytime and maybe even praise me, I don't know. I looked at it because I was upset with the level of the discourse. People were, Monsanto, I hold no brief for them whatsoever, but they're on one side, and then the Greens or Greenpeace or the environmentalists on the other. I'm an environmentalist. I would easily go to that side. But then I became... so I tried to take those two voices, calm them down, and actually say what's really happening. And as you saw in the film, one of the most disturbing things in that film, to me, is that you have 4 companies, and they run the food business in America. Actually, you have 4 companies, and they run the food business in the world. And so I wanted to know how they did that. And the more you look at it, the more it comes down to this rather elusive thing called patents, which when I was a journalist, it would have gone into the too hard to understand box, like nuclear weapons and things like that. And so you never really got to the end of it, so the public never really gets to understand what a patent is about, how companies got these patents that made them, put them in a position to control the food chain. But they do. And part of the way that they do this is through genetically modification of organisms and food. And this all stems back to, I think you heard in the film, it goes back to 1980 when they changed the rules about whether you could patent a living thing. It's slightly before that, but that's basically what happened. And so you can not only patent a cloned animal, but you can patent the gene that you take from one plant to put it into another plant to make it stand up better in a gale, to make it grow better in an environment that's hostile to it, either too much sun, not enough sun, too much rain, not enough rain. So that basically is my take on this. If you begin to understand how they're owning your food, then you can really do something about it. Besides, and of course, I applaud all the film in the sense of let's make us more aware of what we eat, and then if we don't eat the stuff that they give us, then they'll have to stop producing it and produce something that we will buy. But I think that the key to this, for me at least, is to steer the conversation into how did they get to own what they own, and then to try and unravel that and produce another way, a different type of ownership. And I'd be happy to talk about that later if that's... I don't want to bang on about it. You know.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, in the I'll just throw in an aside. Going on with the movie's idea that often they'll take a bad system and instead of fixing it, they'll try to come up with another techno fix. It looks like right now, and I think this has probably happened since your book came out, they're now looking at genetically modified animals before it was just plants. And it looks to me like they're trying to come up with modifications for animals to make them more able to survive in factory farm conditions. So rather than saying, wow, we're putting them in really inappropriate conditions, let's take them out, it's, oh, gee, you know, how can we make them less likely to have E. coli? Or how can we feed a pig nothing but corn and soy and have them come out with more omega-3s? You know, which is not an appropriate way to use this technology, which I think you might be more convinced than I am that it can be put to a humanitarian use, but certainly if there is a humanitarian use, you know, what they're doing is not it.